When I was a child, I had several reoccurring nightmares, but the one that remains with me as this archetypal fear is of being in the back seat of my mother's car, and this was the 1970s, and so you could take a nap in the back of the car, no seatbelts, and I can still feel the canvas, the plastic canvas, sticking to my cheek. And I dreamt that we were in the car and I was just waking up. And I looked up at the driver's seat and I pulled my face off of that canvas of the back seat and know suddenly that not only is my mother not in the car, no one is driving the car. And the car is going full speed down the beach of the lake where our lake house was, where I spent a significant amount of my childhood. And just as I pull my head up, I see that I'm about to hit the water. And the car goes down into the water, and as it is sinking, I realize that there's absolutely no escape for me. And I had that dream over and over again, and it was the thing that haunted me straight through elementary school. And the older I got, the more it wasn't so much the nightmares that I had at night that scared me, but rather the nightmares that we have during the day that come to us through the radio and on our news feed every morning when you wake up. And they haunt me, if not as much as that childhood nightmare. I think they might haunt me more. The recent report on climate change that apparently we as a government have no interest in responding to. There were a couple of weeks there not so long ago where I couldn't keep up with the mass shootings that were happening in our nation in the prayers on Sunday. And then there are those children that haunt me, of refugees and asylees who came to our country in desperation and were separated from their parents. And they're somewhere. No one particularly knows where, and they've kind of filtered out of the news because of all the fires that have been happening. One thing after another thing. These things that give me fear now, mostly made up of foreboding for the future. And the sense that one day, it might not be today, might be tomorrow or the next day, but eventually I'm going to be caught completely off guard, and I'm going to be overwhelmed, and I'm going to be unprepared for what happens. And that terror that started out in a childhood dream, that shapeless terror, that fog that kind of follows not far behind me, is going to finally catch up and surprise me and consume me, and I'll disappear. Advent is a time of waiting for God and a time of waiting for the reign of God. And in the gospel lesson this morning, the disciples ask Jesus, how will we know when the reign of God has drawn near? What will be the signs? And Jesus says, the sign will be when the world completely falls apart. The sun and the moon and the stars and all of this will fall out of the sky, and there will be distress on the earth, and the nations will be confused by the roaring of the waves, and people will faint from fear and foreboding. So when your world is completely falling apart, and when your worst fear suddenly jumps out from behind the next corner and is ready to consume you, that will be the time when the kingdom of God has come. And Jesus says, when that time comes, everybody else is going to faint and fall apart and drown in their own terror. But you who are mine, I want you to stand up and lift your head. And I want you to look for me, because I'm going to be there. For whatever reason, last week, I had so many pastoral care meetings in my office that we went through an entire box of tissues, one after another. And I've tried to make it clear when people come to talk to me that I'm not a social worker and I'm not a therapist. There's only one thing that I do. If you ever come to talk to me, there's going to be only one thing that I do. I'm going to listen to you talk about all those fears that I was telling you about, that smog that's following you, or your depression, and you're going to shoot at it. You're going to try to tell me why you're in your office, why you're in my office, and it might take you someplace between a half hour and an hour to actually get to the reason why you're there. And I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen to all the things, all the fears, all the anxieties, all the troubles at work, all of the depression that you can't quite put your finger on. And all I'm going to do is listen and listen and wait. And I'm going to say, was God over there? Did you see him over there? Wait a second, stop, roll back, tell me what you just said. Was that God talking to you? It's almost like playing Where's Waldo. I sit there, is he over there? Is he over there? That's my whole job. To help you look for where God is in your fear and in your depression. Where is God in the middle of that? So among the count, I lost count, but among the many sit-downs I had in my office was a impromptu meeting that John Henry didn't mean to have with me. He came to tell me something and wound up sitting down and talking for a while, and I have his permission to share some of that conversation. Most of you know that Dean was diagnosed with catastrophic cancer not quite, I don't think, 2 weeks ago. And John Henry and he are in the middle of doing the next thing to respond in the ways that the doctors are recommending that they respond. So they're pretty exhausted, I'm sure. And John Henry sits down, and I ask him what's going on. And there is one thing that I've been waiting for him to be angry, and it hasn't happened yet, except in my office, he suddenly found where he's angry. He's not angry at God. He had a conversation with the head of his order. He's a friar. And he had a conversation with the head of his order explaining what was going on with Dean and about the diagnosis that Dean received. And the head of his order told John Henry, well, all you have to do is have faith. And John Henry got really mad. The reason that John Henry got really mad is after I kind of tried to pull it out of him, kind of put my finger on that and see what else opened up when he talked about it. The reason John Henry was mad was not that it was a cliche or an easy way out of a hard conversation. The reason John Henry was angry was for John Henry to say, you have to have faith, and something good, like maybe everything will work out all right with Dean and his health, is blasphemous. God isn't a magic genie. And the kids were talking about Santa Claus and waiting for Santa Claus. And sometimes I think we mistake God for Santa Claus. God's somebody who comes and drapes a whole bunch of tinsel and lights and pushes play on some saccharine music, and it's jingle bells, and makes everything okay. If there's a God, God will just make it all go away and it'll work out the way that I want it to, and it'll be fine. That's who God is. And if it doesn't happen, it's because I don't have enough faith. God's like some kind of magic genie lamp, and if you rub it the right way, you get what you want, and that's why you pray. For John Henry, that's complete blasphemy. And I think for Dean, too. Our God isn't a God, John Henry said, of illusions. Our God is the truth. Our God is love. And our God is healing. Our God is the God that makes all things new. That doesn't mean that you get what you want. That doesn't mean that there's no pain. That doesn't mean that you don't have to go through fear or hardship. God never said any of that. And anybody who tries to pretend otherwise, it's almost like Jesus. When Jesus goes out into the wilderness and Satan says, "Take these stones and make them into bread." Jesus wouldn't do it because it's blasphemy. That's not what God promised. God promised, "I will give you real life." And the end of the story, your story, is love and healing and wholeness. Not that I'm going to fix everything the way you want it to be, but God says, "I am the truth." And you will have the truth, and the truth is love. So, since it's Advent, and since what the church does in Advent is staying awake and waiting and watching for where God is in the world and in our lives, I think it's a good time to remind you and remind myself that what Jesus says in the gospel text today is, that thing you've been afraid of your whole life, that you don't quite know what it is, it's coming for you. And you're going to be faced with it. Your worst nightmare, it'll happen. It'll happen in a hospital room or over the phone or in this moment of betrayal or grief or sadness. Something's going to happen. On your own bed when you meet your final day. It's out there. And the stars will fall out of the sky. And the oceans will consume the land and everybody will faint in fear. Except for you. Because you're mine. And you know, he says this too, when that does happen, when it comes, when your nightmares comes for you, I'm going to be standing right in the middle of it. And I'm going to be there, and you're going to see me, face to face. So you stand up and remember that. And lift up your head. And if you want to know, says Jesus, what I'm going to look like, I'm going to be the truth that no one else in the world could fully give you. I'm going to be the joy that nothing that happens, ever has happened or will happen, can take away from you. I'm going to be that most secret hope that you never dared to share. I'm going to be the light that shines through you and reveals your finest self and a beauty that you never even knew you had. And the light that shines through you and shows you your finest self is going to be the light of my own love for you. You're going to see who you really always were and who I have always been and how I have been there from the very moment of your birth to your last breath. You will see me. So watch. Stay awake. Your salvation is at hand. Amen.